Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of What a Fustercluck. I am your host, Lolita Keys, fresh off of spring break with the family. Thank you so much for your patience while I took a little bit of time off to spend some quality time with the kiddos and do a little decompressing, a little sunshine, a little outdoor time with some friends and family. Had an amazing time and just really looking forward to getting back in the saddle and recording some additional episodes. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, how apropos. In my last episode, I asked whether feminism was a gift or a trade off. But what I didn't realize at the time is that I was only telling half the story. I think I crept a little bit of this messaging in there. In fact, I know I did a little bit, but I realized I was only telling half the story. How did I realize that? Well, almost immediately after I released that episode, the universe dropped the missing half of the conversation right in my lap, as the universe typically will do if you're just open to the signs. Woo! But yeah, I stumbled across a very powerful conversation on the Patrick Bet David podcast, of all podcasts. He had a gentleman on by the name of Scott Galloway. Now, I've heard Scott on a few other podcasts before, but it was something about this conversation between Patrick Bet David and Scott as two men, two fathers, that just hit me a little bit different. I was literally hit with just a wave of statistics and insights that completely reframed the conversation. This time about boys and men versus the Rachel Wilson conversation with Joe Rogan, where it was a lot about occult feminism and just her thoughts on radicalized feminism and the damage it's done in our society. Now, Scott has a book called Notes on Being a Man. This book outlines all of the data I'm going to share with you today and then some. As a mother of boys only, I always wish I had myself a little daughter, but God had other plans for me, and I'm a boy mom through and through. And so, of course, when I heard this episode, it really just hit me a little bit different. Things like education gaps and social isolation to addiction, suicide, and economic decline, the data paints a sobering picture. While we've spent decades empowering women, we may have unintentionally left men behind. Do I think that this was done on purpose? I really don't, but it just has happened subsequently. And after hearing Scott rattle off this data and knowing what type of things his book cites, it just is a very validating feeling when you kind of know something is going on, but you're like, how can I prove it? Is it just hearsay? Well, I'm here to tell you it's not hearsay. I highly recommend you listen to that full episode. I also recommend that you purchase his book, Notes on Being a Man, and really just do a deeper dive, especially if you are a boy mom, a boy dad, if you're a grandpa, grandma, whatever, if you have any grandsons, sons in your life, even if you don't, even if you are a girl mom and you're trying to see like what are the struggles boys are facing today, it's just a very sobering read. Again, as a mother of boys, this episode is deeply personal to me because the truth is men and women are not enemies. Despite what you may think, despite all the messaging about women not needing men, we are truly meant to complement one another, the yin and the yang. And when one of us struggles, we all feel it. And society is feeling it, which you're about to see. So the big questions: we've spent decades lifting women, but did we forget to lift boys at the same time? And if we did, what does that mean for our society today? Boys in early education and early in their life. Let's start here. I've said before that we are very lucky, my husband and I, to live in the area where we live. We do have really well-rated public schools. But I think there's a lot to be said for the education system and the fact that it's really seen no major changes or strides in literally decades. We're just not changing with the times when it comes to education, even when we know so much more about the differences between boys and girls. You'd think that we would start tailoring things a little bit different, but unfortunately, not so, not happening. And we'll get to that in just a second. So let's dive into some of the statistics. This is not a feeling, ladies and gentlemen. This is a true pattern. 7 out of 10 valedictorians are girls. There is a mismatch in our education system between boys and girls. Boys' prefrontal cortex develops 18 months later than that of a girl. So, what does this mean? When we're comparing boys and girls on the same timeline, when they're literally not on the same timeline biologically, we are literally doing a disservice to both our boys and our girls. What is the solution to this? I can tell you that in the episode, Scott actually says, hold them back a year, hold boys back a year, which seems crazy. But if you're mixing them in classes with girls, it's actually not that crazy when you really think about it, maturity wise. And also, maybe this makes the case for boys' schools and girls' schools. Now, do I think that's the solution to everything? No, I don't. I actually like the fact that boys and girls are in class together at the same time. But here's another funny statistic for you is 89, I'm sorry, not 89%. Boys are twice as likely to get suspended from school or reprimanded for the same behavior a girl is doing, simply because of the feminine and the masculine. This is an undisputable statistic. Literally, a girl could do the same thing, and she is half as likely to get reprimanded or even suspended for that same action. The other interesting thing, 89% of elementary school teachers are women. Now, of course, this seems natural given that most women just kind of have this innate feeling of being a caregiver. Not all women, but statistically speaking, more women are than are not. And so it makes sense that they go into these roles. But how does that impact our boys? When boys want to be, for the most part, not that girls don't want to be running around and playing outside. I'm not saying that. But we cannot argue with the biological differences between boys and girls here. And at the end of the day, you're talking about almost all female teachers. And I will tell you, even my own children come home and often tell me, and their little buddies who come over for, hangouts or whatever, will tell me that they feel like the teachers favor the girls. They'll even go as far as saying the teachers love the girls more or they like the girls more. I mean, there's some truth to that. Even if it's not true, it's true for them and they feel that. I truly believe that my boys actually feel that. I honestly think that when they are at school and they are seeing that, I do it myself. Okay. When I'm with my friends and they have daughters or I'm around my nieces or whatever, it is a different dynamic in the way that I interact with the boys versus the girls. I just can't help it. It's just in me. I think biologically that, I'm a little bit softer with the girls. It's a different approach with the girls than it is with the boys. And so I know there's just no denying that if I do it accidentally, but I know that I'm doing it, for sure, school teachers are absolutely doing the same thing if you really think about it. So, what can we say if we know that this is actually factual? Does it mean we separate boys from girls? Again, no, not necessarily. But if you want your sons to go to an all boys school or your daughters to go to an all girls school, is it really the worst thing? I mean, probably not. There's a lot of other places in life where we could get the kids together. And even if we did like half day kind of thing, I don't know. I mean, all of this is going to take time to sort out, but you can't argue with the statistics. When we know that boys are punished twice as much as girls for the same behavior, you really can't argue with that. When we know that 89% of elementary school teachers are women, we really cannot argue with that. The schools typically reward traits that are more common in girls. You know that boys feel this. It's just less likely that it's understood. And again, as a mom of kids who come home and say these things, I know that it's true. As also as a girl who grew up in class with boys, I mean, you just know it. Like girls tend to be kind of more buddy buddy with the teachers. They're more natural about forming those relationships and those bonds. It just comes a little bit more innately. So let's just stop pretending like it's not a thing when we know that it's a thing. So, what are the solutions? I really couldn't tell you. As I said, I've listed off a few. I don't know. Boys stay in separate schools than girls, or we hold boys back a year so that they have time to kind of level up maturity wise with girls. Um, I don't know all the answers, but I do know that something's got to give because For many boys, school can feel like prison when it's such a blessing to get an education. There are so many kids in impoverished places all around the world who maybe wish that they could get an education or dream about getting an education and they just can't. But there's also boys in this country who literally dream about being outside, doing outside things, whatever that is, even if it's like, I'm going to get old school and say like working with dad on the farm or going with dad to the job or just whatever. I mean, they want to do that more. And it's not to say that girls don't, but I think that there's different ways that we can be creative with children and people who work in education and in psychology and know these statistics. Like these are the right folks to kind of figure out what do we do to fix this? It's certainly not me, but I don't want to just crap all over what's happening in the world today without at least throwing out some ideas. And please feel free to challenge me. I'm not married to any of these ideas. So I'd love to hear from you with what you think if you are a mom struggling with sons, with behavioral issues, or they can't sit still or like whatever. And then, we're going to get into in a few minutes here the conversation about just how we're treating our boys and our bubble wrap society that we're living in today. But before we do, let's talk about boys and men, isolation, and social breakdowns. Here's some more amazing statistics. 15% of men surveyed say that they have zero close friends. We are a tribal people, ladies and gentlemen. We need other people to survive and to thrive. Even if you're someone who's an introvert, more likely than not, you still have your close group of friends or family or whoever it is that you trust. You're not really going at it alone, or at least I hope you're not, again, because we are so tribal in nature. Now, yeah, there are some people out there who can be a total loner, but for the rest of us, like the other 95% of us, we need some people in our life, or we get like really weird and sort of hermit life, and, nobody likes that. 62% of men under 30 aren't trying to date, and 42% of men ages 18 to 24 have never asked a woman out in person. 42%. Thank you, dating apps. Again, this is not just dating, though. This is true disconnection. This is boys feeling less than. This is boys not leveling up at the same time as girls. This is boys being too careful or too intimidated to approach a girl and ask her out. This is also because we have online dating apps and we have social media and text messaging. And so a lot of times boys will literally just like go after girls in ways that, yes, it's like modern day and we just have to get over it and it is what it is. But what is up with like the social connection? There's something still to be said. I tell my kids all the time, they don't always listen to me. I'm not a perfect mom, but I tell them all the time, when you're talking to someone, look them in the eye, and like seriously, just try to talk clearly, right? Speak with confidence. Don't sit there and talk to them like this, like, I don't know, like, hi, how's your day? Oh, I don't know, it's okay. Like, no, you need to do better than that. Okay, funny sidebar story. So my kids are home. They're still on spring break and they have some buddies over. So if you guys hear stuff in the background, it's just, the boys out there being the boys. And I had to take a quick pause so I can go and see what was going on because there was like a ton of commotion happening outside. And I just needed to make sure nobody was on fire or a limb wasn't dangling or an arm wasn't broken or there wasn't some blood somewhere. So anyway, we're good to go. let's let's jump back in. This is real life happening as I try to record this podcast. So a bunch of the statistics I just gave you about, men just lacking the confidence to actually approach a woman, going on social media instead, or dating apps where they're really just not going to have that true connection. I understand that this is the wave of the future, that this is the reality that we are currently living in. I think the difference for me and people of my generation is we had already made those connections before social media came. And so for us, it just became an alternative, right? Because we already had real world connections. But when you're living in a world where your child only knows connection on devices, how does that impact them in face to face, in everyday life? So again, just something to think about. I want to also hover a little bit on some of the crisis indicators. These when I heard Scott and Patrick Bet David mention these on the episode, really sobering, just really sobering statistics. So, again, if you have boys in your life, nephews, grandsons, children, whatever it is, some things that I want you to think about are how and why did we get here? 4 out of 5 suicides are men. 3 out of 4 addicts are men. 3 out of 4 homeless are men. At what point do we stop calling this a coincidence and start calling it what it really is, which is a crisis with our boys and with our men? I've said before, there's a quote I heard recently. Well, not recently. I actually heard it a while ago, and let me try not to botch it. But it essentially says something along the lines of strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. Hard times create strong men. So we know in many ways that this is cyclical when we think of the fall of empires, right? People just getting too power hungry, getting too comfortable. The reality is we need strife in life. And this is something I've been trying to remind myself and also to teach my kids, especially when we have conversations about religion or faith, right? You hear people say all the time, well, like if there's really a God, why doesn't he just wave his magic wand and make it all go away? Well, whether you're a religious person or whether you are not a religious person, if you believe in heaven, or if you believe in this promise of like this blissful eternity, or even if you don't, the reality is iron sharpens iron, right? So you're not going to get stronger by never facing adversity. It's no different than going to the gym and trying to get bigger, like muscles or whatever, or you're trying to lose weight or whatever. If it was easy, everyone would do it. No pain, no gain. Like, expressions like this, they really matter. They really mean something to the human psyche. If your world is so cush and so simple and you get everything at the drop of a hat, I often struggle when I think about just how good my kids' lives are. And I sit there and I sit with that information and I think, God, like we're so blessed and I'm so thankful. And I try to teach them about gratitude or whatever. But okay, I'll tell you a funny story. When we were on spring break, right? We never went anywhere on spring break when I was a kid. When we went on summer vacations, it was to visit a family member or to like the Jersey Shore or whatever. And we stayed in one hotel room with 6 people and just made the best of it and honestly had a blast. But we never went anywhere outside of maybe a week sometime in the summer. And it was never anywhere fancy or extravagant. We never flew on a plane. We drove everywhere like a lot of other people. And for my kids, we do stuff a few times a year, and we started going away for spring break about 4 years ago. And so we get to this awesome resort that I wanted to go to and had been dreaming about like visiting these beaches for a little while since I'd never been to them. Didn't fly. We were able to drive there. Okay, all good. When we got there, the boys were having a blast. In fact, at one point, my youngest son came up to me and said, "Thank you so much, Mommy, for bringing me here. I love it. It's so much fun." And of course, my heart melted and I felt so happy and so thankful and so blessed that we could do these things and take our kids to these places. And then we got to the hotel room, and full disclosure, it was a beach hotel. And honestly, it was way bigger than any hotel room I ever stayed at when I was a kid. Again, we went to the Jersey Shore in a 1-room little hotel. I think it was called the Candlelight Inn or something like that. I don't know. I have to ask my mother. But 2 queen size beds, and we would get a cot. So one of my brothers would sleep in a sleeping bag on the floor. The other would sleep on the cot. They would take turns. My sister and I got one bed. My parents got another bed, one bathroom, and maybe if we were lucky, there was a mini fridge. Okay. And then my mom just packed stuff and like shoved it in coolers. So we were in this tiny space for however long we would go, a long weekend or whatever, maybe a week. Although I always think it was just kind of like a long weekend. But anyway, we get into this room, and it was dated. It was dated, and beach hotels, like they kind of all have that like kind of funky, wet, moldy smell or whatever. And my son, that same son who said, "Thank you, Mommy. Like, I love it. I'm having such a good time here. Thank you for bringing us here." That same son actually started crying. Now, okay, I'll give it to him. He was exhausted. He was tired. We had gotten up early. They were excited to go. They were playing in the sun all day long, like just loading up on junk, living their best life. And so he was starting to crash, right? From all the crap, all the sugar, just the exhaustion, whatever. And so he was kind of cranky, if I'm being honest. But he said to me, he said, Mommy, I don't like this hotel room. He goes, it's too cheap for me. And I about fell off the balcony and plummeted to my doom. I mean, I literally was like, what did you just say? This hotel is too cheap for you. This was literally a one bedroom kind of like mini apartment. Okay. Yes, it was dated, but there was a bedroom with two double beds in it, a full bathroom, a mini kitchen, and then a full on living room with a balcony overlooking the Gulf. Like just gorgeous view. All right. Really awesome. Everything about the resort was pretty great, like the food, whatever. It wasn't five-star by any stretch of the imagination, but it certainly wasn't like a Bobo, like Motel 9. It was nice. And when he said this hotel is too cheap for me, I thought, oh my God, I have failed. Like I have failed as a mom. I'm over here talking about we got to make our boys strong, blah, 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 blah. And then I realized all of the places we've ever stayed, everywhere we have ever been, have been nice places, well maintained places. And if we use a Marriott card so we can get points, and we typically will try to stay at like a nicer Marriott or whatever. So they're just not used to this kind of sort of 80s hotel room, if I'm being honest. And it just really struck me, and I thought, good God, kid, did you really just say this hotel is too cheap for you? Long story short, he ended up like bucking up. We got some water in him. He got himself like a little nap in there, and then he was totally fine after that. And then our friends showed up the next day, and he was happy as ever. And it is what it is. But the fact that he uttered those words, this hotel is too cheap for me, I just couldn't believe it. I'm like, I don't even know. Send me some suggestions on some things I need to expose this kid to so he realizes it. But when I look around, again, it's easy for me to be thankful. I grew up in a relatively small home. Me and my three siblings all shared a bedroom. We had one shower for all six of us, which, you tell that to somebody in the 1800s and they're like, you had indoor plumbing? So with every generation, things get better and better. But again, it goes back to my point. My husband does home remodeling and renovation, and he's a complete artist. He loves what he does, and he has just customized our house from floor to ceiling, and it's truly gorgeous. And sometimes I'm like, I cannot believe I live in a house like this. I never imagined I would live in a home like this. And I don't even live in a mansion or anything crazy. It's just a suburban home. But I just have so much appreciation. And for my kids, it's all they know. They don't remember the first house we lived in that was much smaller than the house we live in now, and they just have no recollection. And so to bring them into this kind of dated hotel room on the beach, and it's like a little stank, whatever, and like make them live through that is just hysterical to me. So anyway, I wanted to share that. The cultural messaging. What are we telling boys? I've said it before. I'm going to say it probably a million times. I'll never stop saying it. When we're saying things like girls rule, boys drool, and you don't need a man, and men are predators, and masculinity is toxic. And when you celebrate women, it's empowerment. But when you advocate for men, you're labeled an extremist. Even Scott Galloway pointed out on the PBD podcast that if you advocate for men, you're labeled like Andrew Tate. I mean, does it get any worse? And maybe you love Andrew Tate, maybe you hate Andrew Tate. I don't know, one way or the other. He is like, again, there's extremes in men and women. He is an extreme masculine figure. So what I'm saying is this is what happens when people want to attack you. They go for the low hanging fruit. You can easily lift up boys without freaking being Andrew Tate. And it's just a gross exaggeration in my opinion. But we have to decide, you guys, which is it? Are boys disposable or just inconvenient to talk about? One or the other. Like they can't both be true. And when are we going to realize that we need some synchronicity here? Because with many of the statistics I just read to you or have been saying as I've been recording this podcast, is it not hitting you yet that if you are a man or a woman listening to this podcast and you are raising daughters, do you not want them to have a healthy, strong partner in their life? Because if we keep going at this rate, either women will not be getting married, which we can already see in the data. A lot of them aren't. They will not be having babies, which we can already see in the data. Many of them aren't. Or they're going to marry down so much so that like the divorce rate is just going to continue to skyrocket because you can only put up with somebody who's like sucking the life out of you or a total deadbeat for so long before you're like, I'm out. So what are we doing? Where is the middle ground? Why can we not lift up our boys at the same time as our girls? And how can we not see the damage that we've already done in a lot of the data that I've already given you? Here's some more, okay? It's difficult to tell men to level up when we have literally removed the ladder. Let's talk about blue collar jobs, for instance. It used to be that not everybody goes to college, you guys. And let me just take a minute because I want to look up some statistics about college and some of the damage that the rising costs of education has done as well. Okay, so I dug them up. Here's some things that I want us to keep in mind. Traditional middle class on ramps in the manufacturing sector have either been offshored or outsourced to technology. And also, let's not forget that they've been demonized or belittled as a blue collar jobs where you'll never go far, you'll never excel, you'll never make a good living. The wealth transfer from young to old. Listen to this. The average 72-year-old is wealthier than they were 40 years ago, which is awesome, right? We want our older population to be financially stable so that they're not a drain on society or whatever, or to their kids, whatever have you. So that's awesome. However, the average person under 40 is 24% less wealthy. Thanks a lot, inflation and our amazing economy. 24% less wealthy than they were historically. Thanks in great part to rising costs in housing and education. I am a victim of that shitty model. I was always told, go to college. You have to support yourself. You don't need a man, as I mentioned on my last episode. And so what did I do? I went to college and I got my 4-year degree. And then like a moron, I'm like, oh, let me go ahead and get my master's so that I can finally make that 6-figure job, which never came. I got my master's of science in healthcare informatics thinking, okay, yeah, technology is the wave of the future. I'm going to make 6 figures as soon as I graduate. I've said it before. My first job offer after grad school was like less than 40K, if I'm not mistaken. So total gut punch when I was now 6 figures in debt from a college degree. And so I have to laugh because this messaging was so strong. Yet I look around at people like my husband or other people who didn't go to college and just went to work right out of high school, whether it was for UPS or the post office or a cable company or just whatever, or went to just more of the vocational route, and they're doing pretty damn good. They are not struggling. They're all living in the same house that I am and others like me with a college degree are living in. It's like, and you know what's awesome? They don't have the debt. I have the debt. They don't have the debt. The other like glaring obvious thing here is housing. Housing and education used to be the 2 primary means for getting ahead. And now they are quite literally putting you further and further behind because the costs of homes, the interest rates on mortgages. Now, I know a lot of people argue that I think in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken, or sometime around that era, mortgage rates were ridiculously, insanely high. But let's be honest, like the cost of the houses today it's almost like gross. And add on that high interest rates, and add on that a ridiculous amount of student loan debt, and add on to that the job market, and add on to that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like, what are you setting these boys up for? And these girls too, quite frankly. But when you've got boys, when you've got girls graduating at almost twice the rate of boys from college, what does the data tell you? So when these blue collar jobs are outsourced and demonized and everybody's going to college, but then they're not getting jobs after that, or they're still living at home with their parents. When housing and again, education, when these things are not available to you at the times when they typically used to be, and these are the places where people would start to accumulate their wealth, when people under 40 are 24% less wealthy, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the pudding, you guys. What more do we need to know to realize that this is truly a crisis? And actually, this goes just beyond our boys, but to the girls too. So, speaking of that, when we focus on like parenting and our ideology in the episode, and I've said his name before as well, Jonathan Haidt, who wrote the book, The Coddling of the American Mind. And there's a few other books I recommended with a similar tone and statistics. Some of the things that he says are, overprotection leads to anxiety, which leads to fragility. When we remove obstacles instead of prepping our kids to overcome them, we're creating this like softer society. So again, what is it going to take for us to realize that we cannot bubble wrap our children? We have to let them go out into the world. We have to let them get in trouble. That has to be okay. They have to be able to get hurt. You learn through failure. Failure is the biggest teacher. It also is about taking risks. Now, granted, we don't want our kids like jumping off the second story roof onto a trampoline and into the pool, which sounds awesome. And probably they would do that. But the funny thing is, a lot of kids today are actually terrified and wouldn't do that because crazy, anxious parents like me would probably already have beat it into their minds. And so this, again, I'm not perfect, you guys. I've made those mistakes. I've made those mistakes of thinking, I know so much better than you. If I just say this to you over and over again, and what does that do? It puts anxiety in our kids, and then they become afraid to try things. And that is a recipe for disaster, and one which I myself am trying to sort of dig my way out of so that my kids will be a little bit more fearless so that they do take chances, because it's only through taking those chances and hearing no a million times that one yes becomes so sweet. So moms and dads, grandmas, grandpas, I want you guys to think about that next time you're with your kids, your nieces, your nephews, whatever, and they're asking you for something and the easy answer is to say yes. Think about what you're doing in the long run. They just don't appreciate things. They will lose their ability to appreciate because they are so used to yes, that the real world is going to slap their asses so hard and they're not going to be ready at all for what is coming when they live in a world of yes, because we're too exhausted as parents, or we just want to give them everything we didn't have, and we don't realize the damage that we're doing. So you cannot soften boys, you cannot soften men, and then expect them to still lead, build, and protect. Last I checked, I don't know that there's some radical feminine army out there of like all women. Last I checked, most of the people who are in Army, Navy, Marines, whatever it is, are mostly men. And I'm not mad about that. Like, I'm sad about it in the sense that I have two sons and I would hate to see them, killed in the line of duty. But I would also be very proud if they enlisted. I'm not going to lie. I do think patriotism is so important to a culture. Being radicalized is dangerous, but patriotism builds strength, builds character, it builds pride. And that is something that I'm trying to instill in my kids. And so again, I don't see why we cannot find that middle ground for boys and for girls. I think we also have a pretty huge role model void, which also became evident to me the more I listened to people like Scott Galloway. So, kids don't just need love, you guys. They need direction. Now, I've been a pretty stringent mom, I'm not going to lie, but I am very aware, especially now. I feel I've come so far in this particular journey, but I'm very aware of the fact that I can love on my kids so hard, but I cannot be such a softie that I let them walk all over me, because then what am I teaching them? And so it's so crucial for both our boys and our girls to have this kind of direction. But boys are very much lacking, especially when we have 89% of elementary school teachers being women. Because the reality is, boys need boys just like girls need girls. Boys need men, girls need women. And yes, like we're going to have that yin and yang where boys need their mommies too, and girls need their daddies 100%. But there are these innate roles that we just kind of fill. And I feel like we're really struggling for boys to have strong male figures, which what happens when you don't have a dad in the house? What happens to both boys and girls when you don't have a dad in the house? I really want to kind of dig into that too. So let me pull up some of those numbers. Okay, I found it. So, all right, some alarming but obvious statistics. In the absence of strong male role models, boys are more likely to be incarcerated than go to college. Let me repeat that. In the absence of a strong male role model, boys are more likely to be incarcerated than to go to college. Girls have similar outcomes and often tend to become more promiscuous when they don't have a strong male role model in the house. They look to men that are not good to fill the void of the strong male role model that they didn't have in their life because they were missing a dad in the picture. So we cannot continue to glorify single mothers. This does not mean that single mothers shouldn't be honored because it's such a hard job, and single mothers come about in many different ways. Sometimes the dad splits, sometimes the dad unexpectedly passes away, and single moms truly are superheroes. But what we cannot do is encourage women to be single moms. Ideally, you have both a mother and a father in the home for reasons that should be obvious to anyone. If you really feel like you can raise a child, if your attitude is, I don't need a man, I'm going to raise these kids on my own, you're living a lie. I'm sorry. Actually, I'm not sorry. I'm not even going to apologize, but you're living a lie. Kids need their mothers and their fathers. We serve different purposes. We serve different roles. And when I hear things like that, in the absence of a strong male role model, boys are more likely to be incarcerated. I mean, that's enough for me. So at the end of the day, like, what do women want? We want a strong, economically viable man. And that's really like what I wish that we could get back to, because it's just getting crazy out there without strong male role models or strong men in society. I'm sorry to say, guys, I'm a woman myself, and we're not going to keep the world running if we don't start to lift up our boys at the same rate via which we've lifted our girls, and get away from a lot of this negative commentary like you don't need a man, and girls rule and boys drool, and all boys are terrible misogynistic pigs, and they're all predators. And especially if you're a white male, statistically you are even more likely to be deemed as just this horrible person for the sins of your great grandfathers. And it's really just kind of sickening. So the modern trap for men, again, when you don't have a strong male role model in your life, and boys are just kind of like left to their own devices, and when women are taught that they don't need men, and they like don't have babies, don't bring kids into this horrible world, it's all so terrible. Like we have Amazon, and we have Target, and we have indoor plumbing and all of these great things, but don't bring kids into this horrible world. When you start talking like that and making women feel like they really don't need to pursue a relationship or a marriage or a family, the good thing about women is typically they will channel that energy into an amazing, successful career. But men, on the other hand, they will typically channel that energy into porn, gaming, and conspiracy theories, and gambling. All of these things are addiction problems, right? So when a man is without a purpose, he will typically go to addiction and things that are considered no bueno for you, especially excessively: porn, gaming, gambling. crazy conspiracy theories, which I'll dabble in a few of those because why not? But women, they will take that negative and turn it into a positive, and they will dive into their careers and become these really successful women. But you can see psychologically, men and women, we are not the same. We are not the same. We're never going to be the same. You cannot keep over feminizing men and over masculinating women and expect that we're all just going to merge into this like same thing, this non binary bullshit. We need men, we need women, and we have got to stop going to these extremes on both sides. And then there's like social media and the influencer culture distortion. If you can't, like, think about social media today. If you ask a lot of kids today, what do you want to be when they grow up? They will say the most ridiculous thing. They all want to be YouTubers, they all want to be influencers. I encourage my kids to actually get back to the more blue collar jobs. I'm like, you know what? You might want to be a plumber. You might want to be an electrician. You might want to do what your dad does and do carpentry. You might want to build homes. You might want to pour concrete. Like all of these things, yes, they're hard, they're grueling, but our boys are capable of these things, and so are many girls. Quite frankly, there's no reason why we can't encourage girls to get into this same, line. Um, but honestly, like it's nothing to be proud of because, you think it's hard for your kids to get into the NFL. Good luck being an influencer. And I look at a lot of these people on YouTube and I really am stringent. I'm not going to say I don't let my kids watch it. I do, but I put up all kinds of parameters. But sometimes when they watch these video gamers like Preston and guys like that, it's like I have to tell them that that dude is like I cannot believe that guy is married. I really cannot. Like, there is nothing about that dude that screams masculine to me. He's like gaming online all day with friggin' kids or these like dorky ass teenagers. And you can call me a hater. I don't care. I don't, I wouldn't take his money. Maybe I might. No, I'm kidding, but I'm not. But I'm kidding. But like seriously, I would never aspire to be that guy. And it kills me that like those are the people that our kids aspire to be, as like Preston Plays and freaking Blippy and like all these other weirdo YouTubers. And I'm like, no, you guys, there's so much value. There is so much value in using your hands, your strength, and your brain. Get away from thinking that you're just going to be this famous YouTuber and start to channel that energy into something that's more creative. And so this is why I limit my kids watching this stuff, because they could easily just sit down all day and just get wrapped up into the YouTube algorithm. And so as parents, we just really have to be careful about that. And think about video games between, multiple decades ago and today. I talked about this on my gaming episodes, right? Games used to be where you only had 3 lives, and when you died, that's it, dude. You're going right back to the beginning of the game. That's it. Your 3 lives are up. Now it's like you can die incessantly. There's like no object to the games really. There's no ending. You don't have to like remember things. Everything is constantly changing. And I don't know. I just feel like everything we're doing nowadays is just setting kids up for less failure and more addiction, which is why it's even more important now than ever before that we stop with this radicalized feminism and that we start reminding our boys and our men that they are strong, that they are capable, that they can be confident, that they can be proud without shitting all over women or feeling like women are less than men. We all have our strengths. We all have our differences. And that's what we really need to embrace. The core truth is that men and women are not competitors. We are complementary to one another by our very nature. We are the yin and the yang. When one side rises and the other side falls, society will destabilize. I repeat, strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. Hard times create strong men. This will reign true until kingdom come. I don't care what anybody says. And so if you don't hear me now, if you don't take this message to heart, if we don't start making changes now, we will grow up, our kids will grow up, and incels are just going to be rampant. Girls will not be having babies because they will not have a formidable partner or mate, or who knows what could happen. I don't even want to know. That's the whole point I'm trying to make here is we have to reclaim masculinity as a necessity, not this toxic personality trait. We need to reinstill the power of family, connection, community, faith. Again, even if you're not a religious person, we need to reinstill hard work and real responsibility. Give your kids things to do. They actually want to do things. They actually want to be helpers by nature. But if you let them go too long without that, it will be a struggle to get them to embrace it. We didn't, and we haven't just empowered women, unfortunately. We have unintentionally disempowered men. And the statistics are real. And now we really have to fix both. We really have to fix both. I'm going to close this episode out by listing again some of the statistics I've already said throughout this episode, just so that you really can take away the true depth and brevity of what's happening right now. 7 out of 10 high school valedictorians are girls. 20% of men aged 25 to 34 still live at home with their parents, up 14% historically. 15% of men report they have zero close friends, no sense of community. 62% of men under 30 aren't even trying to date. 42% of men ages 18 to 24 have never asked a woman out in person. 4 of 5 deaths by suicide are men. 3 out of every 4 addicts are men. 3 out of every 4 homeless are men. So please take this information. Please take this data to heart. Let's keep reminding our girls of how capable they are, but let's also start to give that same message to our boys. And what we need to stop doing is comparing boys to girls in the sense of who is stronger, who is weaker, who is more capable. The reality is we are all capable. We are both capable, and we each bring our own set of unique gifts to the table. And if we can get back to complimenting one another, and not by saying like, you're so beautiful, you're so handsome. I don't mean that. I mean complimenting the sexes, the feminine and the masculine, instead of demonizing men and promoting toxic masculinity and telling girls that they don't need boys and that they don't need men. We need to get away from that and start to hit the reset button and level set for the future, literally for the future of the boys and the men in our society, so that those numbers decrease. I want to see them dwindle, go down, decrease, less suicide, less depressed people, right? But I want to see some stability too. So there will never be a perfect world where we don't have suicide and where everybody's just this happy-go-lucky person. But I want to see those numbers come down. I don't want to see them rise for either sex. And we just need stability. And the only way we can get there is if we start changing the narrative and changing the messaging. So that'll do it for another episode of What a Fustercluck. Thank you so much for listening. Please remember, I'm going to say this like a broken record every episode. It's so important if you are listening to the show, if you are a fan of the show. I so appreciate it. I love that you're listening. I love that you're streaming, but I need you to hit that subscribe button. I need you to hit that follow button. I would love it if you shared the show with friends and family. Just send the link every time that link gets shared. It just helps me out in the algorithm. Rate the show. Email me whatafusterclucklk at gmail.com with any ideas, feedback, topics to discuss, guests that you'd like to see me have on. Maybe you want to come on. So please feel free to email me. I am currently booking some guests for April 2026. So you'll have some other people on this podcast besides just me. And I'm really looking forward to some of those shows and some of those interviews. So as always, thank you for listening. What a Fustercluck. Lolita Keys. Like, follow, subscribe, share. Available on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks, everybody. Until next time.